Subscribe to IMR Scary Tales and watch spine-chilling horror stories almost every day. And don't forget to click on the bell icon.
3 days ago, I had an encounter with one of those crazy clowns that everybody's hearing about lately. Most people are running into them on the road in the safety of their cars. I, however, had a much more disturbing encounter. I live in Massachusetts, and my property is enclosed by trees with a long winding driveway leading to the road. During the day, I was cutting down a drooping branch from a tree about the entrance to my property. That's when I first saw him. A clown, or a guy dressed as a clown, I should say, walking down the side of the road and stopping very slowly right at the center of the start of my driveway. He very gradually turned his head to face me, body still facing the road. I had to give him credit. His clown costume was terrifying, like something out of a horror movie. I chuckled to myself and smiled in his direction. Judging by everyone else's experiences, I was expecting him to start bluff charging me, but he didn't. He just turned his head back to the road and kept walking. I would have said something, but I guess I just didn't care enough. That night, I did my usual locking up of the shed outside and shutting off all the lights. When I got inside to start making dinner, I thought I heard something coming from outside. I opened the kitchen window a little more, but all I could hear was the wind and leaves blowing. I shut the window completely now and resumed making the food. I almost had a heart attack when there was a heavy, aggressive knocking coming from that same window I had just shut. My whole body immediately went into panic mode. I felt every body part shaking, and my heart thumping twice as much as usual. I took the knife I had sitting on the counter and brought myself to look outside the window. But it was literally too dark to even see past the glass. Once again, I struggled to sum up the courage to do something that I felt needed to be done. In this case, it was time to turn on the patio light and go outside. So I walked over to the back sliding glass door, put my finger under the light switch, afraid to flick it, waiting for a good 5 seconds, and finally I did it. The horror I was afraid to experience out there came prematurely, before I could even step outside. The patio light exposed the same clown from earlier, standing right outside the sliding glass door, head tilted like a dog staring at me behind an ugly mask. I could have, and probably should have, opened the door right there and then, and stabbed the guy, or at least threatened him, but it's so easy to think back and say I should have done this or that. Instead, I simply ran upstairs to the telephone, where I called the police. I could hear banging on the heavy glass door downstairs, all the way up from my bedroom. And it got worse as the clown started pounding with both hands repeatedly, as opposed to the slow and steady knocking he was doing before. It got worse when the clown started screaming like a psychotic asylum patient over the sounds of the pounding of the door. I felt like I was going to die. Literally every minute that went by that the cops hadn't arrived felt like forever. The screaming and banging finally came to a stop when I heard a familiar voice outside yelling, "What the hell are you doing? And get the fuck out of there!" I looked out the window to see Mark, my neighbor, walking over with a rifle in his hand. When I went outside to greet and thank him, he told me that the clown ran off into the woods. The cops arrived briefly after that and took down my description, did a quick 5-minute sweep of the property and left. Mark let me crash at his place for the night, just in case. We don't play with shit when it comes to our well-being and safety. So yeah, at the time that I'm sharing this with you, it was only 3 days ago that I was in the middle of this whole clown mess.
I got a gift for you, Miss Carver. Matthew stood in front of my desk, holding out a big chocolate chip cookie. I have to say, I was surprised. Matthew and I didn't exactly get off on the right foot. His grades were bad, and whenever I corrected him during class, I could hear him muttering, "You're stupid," or "so ugly," under his breath. But I knew his parents were going through a nasty divorce, and he was only 9, so I let it slide. And it seems my efforts paid off. "Thank you, that's so sweet," I said, placing it in the middle of my desk. To tell the truth, I didn't really want to eat the cookie. I was on a strict no-sugar diet to lose 5 pounds before my friend's wedding this weekend, so I didn't eat the cookie that morning. It just sat there, nestled between my pencil holder and stack of flashcards. But before lunch, Matthew came up to me and asked, Are you going to eat your cookie now, Miss Carver? And finally, I felt kind of bad. So when Matthew came into class after lunch and saw that the cookie was missing, he looked shocked. You ate it? Yes, I did, I said with a smile. It was very good. He sat down in the back row and didn't say anything for the rest of class. I admit, I felt bad for fooling him, but I couldn't break my diet now. It was stashed away in one of my drawers. In the afternoon, I ended class a few minutes early. I had to catch my flight to Miami for the wedding. As I was packing up to leave, I thought of the cookie. I can't just leave it here over the weekend, it'll go bad. Well, maybe I'll bring it, I thought, just in case I get really hungry on the plane. I wrapped it in a napkin, threw it in my laptop bag, and caught an Uber to the airport. The lines at security were long. When I finally got there, I put my laptop in one of the bins and threw the rest of the bag on the conveyor belt. But after I passed through the metal detector, I was immediately pulled aside by one of the TSA agents. "Ma'am, come with me," she said, leading me down a hallway and into a back room. "I'm already late for my flight," I huffed. "I might not be able to board." The door swung open. There were several people sitting around the table. Some were TSA agents. Others were wearing a uniform I couldn't identify, and they were all staring at the item in the center, the cookie. Dread flooded me. My legs began to shake. Matthew's face flashed through my mind with his toothy grin. In a small voice, I asked, "What's going on?" One of the officers stepped forward. The scanner showed that there's something embedded inside the cookie, or rather, multiple things. I stared down at it. My vision began to swim, and I gripped the back of the chair for support. What's inside it?" I asked, my voice trembling, but I was afraid of the answer. Razor blades. 8 of them, baked right into it.
One of my relatives passed away suddenly. I never met the woman. She had a daughter who was 4 years old. The little girl's name was Yuki. Her father wasn't able to raise her on his own, so he asked my aunt to take care of her. The little girl refused to be alone and never left my aunt's side. It started to become a problem. My aunt couldn't go anywhere without Yuki. She constantly needed attention. Even my aunt's own daughter started to get jealous. One day, my aunt told me she had to go out of town for a couple of days and asked if I would babysit the little girl for her. I said it would be my pleasure. I lived alone and I could do with some company. A few days later, my aunt dropped Yuki off at my apartment. As she was leaving, she took the little girl aside and said, "Yuki, please be good, behave yourself." When my aunt was gone, I tried to talk to Yuki and play some games with her, but the little girl's behavior was very strange. She had a teddy bear tucked tightly under her arm and never let go of it. She never smiled. She never spoke. All she ever did was sit quietly in the corner and stare at the wall. It made me kind of uneasy. I was trying to find something that would entertain her. I had just bought a new digital camera, and I decided to let Yuki play with my old one. When she saw the camera, her eyes lit up. I showed her how to use it, and she went around my apartment taking pictures of everything. There was a bright smile on her face. That evening, I discovered how difficult Yuki was to deal with. Whenever I tried to leave the room, she started crying and screaming out my name. I couldn't leave her alone, or she would create a huge fuss. She even insisted on going to the bathroom with me, which was very embarrassing. At bedtime, she refused to stay in the spare room and insisted on sleeping in my bed. I read her a bedtime story, and after a while I managed to get her to go to sleep. That was when I noticed her teddy bear. One of its legs was charred and blackened, as if it had been burned. It made me wonder. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a strange noise. When I turned over, I saw that there was something wrong with Yuki. The little girl's body was trembling and shaking. Her eyes were wide open, her teeth were chattering, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. I held her close and asked her what was wrong. "She's looking at me again," she mumbled. "Who is?" I asked in surprise. "The dark woman," replied Yuki. She wouldn't say anything more. I tried to tell her it was just her imagination, but she kept shaking her head and whimpering. It took me a long time to get her to go back to sleep. The next day, Yuki was fine again. She loved playing with my digital camera. When it was time for her to go home, I told her she could keep it. Yuki hugged me. Although she didn't say anything, I could tell she was overjoyed. I dropped the little girl off at my aunt's house and stayed to have a cup of tea. My aunt thanked me for taking care of Yuki. We spent a while chatting at the kitchen table. Poor little thing, said my aunt. She hasn't said a word since her mother died. I couldn't control my curiosity. How did Yuki's mom die? I asked. A strange look came over my aunt's face. She died in a fire. How did the fire start? I asked. Well, my aunt hesitated, unwilling to talk about it. It's a very sad story. She committed suicide. Yuki's mother was a very troubled woman. She poured gasoline over herself and lit a match. She burned herself alive. Oh my God, I exclaimed. How horrible. Yes, said my aunt. Her family was so shocked they hushed it up and pretended it was an accident. We had a small funeral, but only close relatives were invited. Yuki wasn't there. She doesn't even know her mother is dead. She thinks her mother is just on a long holiday. We haven't had the heart to tell her the truth. Poor Yuki, I murmured. My aunt nodded her head sadly. Poor Yuki. A few days after that, Yuki died. My aunt was trying to change Yuki's behavior. At night, she forced the little girl to sleep in her own bedroom. Even though Yuki screamed and cried, my aunt left her there alone and locked the door. In the morning, she found Yuki lying motionless in bed. The poor little girl was dead. Nobody could understand what had happened. The coroner couldn't determine a cause of death. There wasn't a mark on her body. She was perfectly healthy. She had just mysteriously died during the night. There was no explanation. After the funeral, I went back to my aunt's house. Everyone was very sad. She returned the digital camera I had given to Yuki. I took it home with me. It was something to remember her by. The memory card was full of random photos that Yuki had taken. I browsed through them, wiping a tear from my eye. There were pictures of my apartment, pictures of my aunt's house, pictures of flowers, dogs, toys, candy. Silly pictures that a child would take. Then I came to the last picture, and it made my blood run cold. My hands were trembling. I wanted to scream, but nothing would come out. The time stamp on the photo showed that it had been taken on the night Yuki died. Here is the last picture that the poor little girl ever took with my digital camera.
I'm sure by now we all know what Fortnite is. I'd known about it for the longest time, but I never actually played it until my friends basically forced me to download it and play it with them. They wanted to play in squads, which is what it's called when you play in groups of 4. My 4 friends were Evan, Xavier, and Braxton. Evan was hands down the best player and basically the initiator of this group. Xavier was the second best, and then there was Braxton. Braxton only spoke on his headset when he was in trouble or needed help. Evan, Xavier and I, on the other hand, just goofed around and talked the whole time. The two of them did their best to explain how to play to me over the headset. Anyway, none of this really matters. I'll skip ahead to the important part. Evan stopped talking, and there was a good 10 seconds of silence. And then, Evan, who was leading us from one point to another, stopped dead in his tracks, and his character just stood still for a while. Xavier turned on his headset, sounded annoying, and told Evan to move his character. Still, he just stood in one place and said nothing. According to the screen, Evan's mic was making a noise, and I could hear background noise that seemed to be coming from his mic. Xavier, Braxton, and I were telling Evan to move or that we would ditch him, but we all dropped silent when a horrific, almost painfully loud screaming came from Evan's mic. It wasn't like he was screaming into the mic. It seemed like Evan was somewhere in the background of the room. Then a door slammed shut in the background, and the 3 of us were left not knowing what to say or do. I told the 2 of them I'd call Evan immediately and turn off the console. I tried calling him 5 times, but he never picked up. So I decided to drive over to his house, which was just 2 minutes away. I got to his house and saw no cars in the driveway, but the front door was open and the lights were on throughout the house. I let myself in, screaming Evan's name. Evan screamed back from somewhere upstairs. I followed the sound of his voice right up to the loft bedroom, where I found him hiding under the bed. He told me to hide. I told him to get out from under the bed and tell me what happened, and he said there was someone in the bedroom. He would hardly speak in short sentences for the longest time until he calmed down and finally explained everything in detail. As Evan was playing Fortnite with us, he felt a tap under his bed. When he pulled up the cloth material that covered the sides of the bed and looked under it, he saw a grown man hiding underneath. That's when he threw his headset on the bed and screamed as he backed into the corner. He said the man emerged from under the bed as Evan was still paralyzed in fear. Then the man walked straight out the bedroom door, and that was the last that he ever saw of him. At that moment, he didn't know if the man was still in the house or not, so he called the cops, not knowing what else to do. When they showed up, we didn't know what to expect from them. 2 cops actually arrived. The male officer went inside of the house and looked around while the female officer stayed outside with us with a small pocket notebook in her hand, writing down everything that Evan described to her. And just like that, the cops left. I stayed over at Evan's house that night just to make him feel better. We all still play Fortnite together, and now I've become much better at it. When I was growing up, there was a girl in my neighborhood who was very weird. All of the other kids were freaked out by her. One day, she told all the kids that in the forest behind her house there were dead, bloody people. When they heard this, all of the kids freaked out and told their parents. Their fathers had to go out and search the forest, just in case. All they found were candy wrappers and empty beer bottles. After that, all of the kids in the neighborhood refused to go near her, including me. A few years later, my parents divorced. On the day the moving came to take my mom's things out of the house, the girl came out of nowhere and told me that Matt didn't like that my parents were getting a divorce. I had no idea who Matt was. Even though I stopped being friends with her, my dad was still friends with her parents. My dad told me that Matt was her imaginary friend. Her parents had told him all about the problems that they were having with her. Matt was often too physical. They claimed that Matt could control the lights and could even make the power go out. They said Matt also knocked on doors at night. If he was ignored, the banging on the doors would start. A few years later, my dad decided that he would invite the girl and her parents over to our house. I begged my dad not to do this, but he thought it would be nice to catch up with them. When they came over that night, my dad told me to entertain the girl, so I brought her to my bedroom, and she seemed to be acting quite normally. She even told me how nice my room was. However, I was still creeped out by her. She just sat down in the middle of the floor while I tried to put a movie on the DVD player. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, in the most deadpan voice, she said, "Matt's here." At that exact moment, the lights began to flicker on and off. I got so scared, I ran out of my room, crying in fear. Her parents came running up the stairs, dragging their daughter out of my room, and took her home. For weeks afterwards, I refused to sleep in my bedroom. I haven't heard much from that family ever since. I heard that Matt still controlled the lights, but I don't know if he's still around. To this day, whenever the lights begin flickering or a bulb blows, it still freaks me out.
It was the middle of night, and I was in the bedroom trying to relax. I changed the channel on the TV and saw that the local news was on. At the bottom of the screen, there was a breaking news alert. Murderer on the loose, hiding in the vicinity. Police warning everyone to be on the alert. Suspect is armed and dangerous. I was just drifting off to get sleep when I was awakened by a strange noise downstairs. It sounded like there was someone in the house. At that moment, my heart began beating fast, and I broke into a cold sweat, straining my ears to listen. I thought I heard another noise. It was the sound of a door creaking. It wasn't my imagination. There was an intruder in the house. I have to get out of here fast, I thought. I slipped off the bed as quietly as possible and crept towards the window. My body was shaking with fear, and I was hoping I didn't make any noise. Just then I heard faint footsteps make their way up the stairs. It sounded like more than one person. At any second they would burst through the door. I had to get away. I climbed out of the window and onto the garage roof, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. At the edge of the roof, I grabbed the drain pipe and lowered myself until I dropped into the garden. As I paused, I looked up at the window I had just escaped from and saw the lights go on. That was close, I thought. A chill ran down my spine as I thought about what would have happened if they caught me. I made my way to the bottom of the garden and into the woods. Once I was safely hidden by the trees, I broke into a run. I pushed onwards, stumbling through the darkness, moving through the undergrowth, until I came to another housing estate. Clutching my knife, I headed towards another house.
When I was in my senior year of high school, 17 years old, all that was on my mind and my friends' minds were girls. There was one girl in particular in my physics class that I was really into. Her name was Tiffany. Some guys called her Crazy Tiff because she was super hot, but also apparently really crazy according to her exes. That's irrelevant to this story though. Basically, my best friend CJ managed to get one of Tiffany's friends, Gianna, to come hang out with us at some beach that night, since it was a Friday and the weather was warm. The best part? Tiffany agreed to come along. This was it. My big chance with Crazy Tiff. CJ pulled up to my house at 10 o'clock that night. I hopped in shotgun, and then we went to pick up the girls. On our way there, we agreed that our first priority was to get me alone with Tiffany and CJ getting some alone time with Gianna. I was extremely nervous, but when Tiffany and Gianna got in the car, things were actually going pretty smoothly. CJ and I managed to make them laugh a bunch of times. By the time we got to the beach, I was confident Tiffany and I would vibe really well alone. I don't remember the tiny details of what happened after we stepped out of the car and onto the dunes, but I do remember the beach being completely void of any other people, and CJ somehow managed to go off alone with Gianna into the darkness. After a few minutes, just like we planned, Tiffany and I took a little walk down to the water and wet our feet and whatnot. Then we just laid on the sand and talked for a while. Things were going smoothly until Tiffany pointed out to the ocean. "What is that?" she said. I looked to where she was pointing but didn't see anything. I laughed at her apparent illusion and got up to go closer to the water in the hopes of maybe seeing what she saw. My feet touched the cold water, and that's when I was close enough to see it. There was a long, thin object sticking out of the water. I entered a little closer and saw it moved. I jumped out of the water and ran back to Tiffany. "It's a person," I said quietly to her. It was truly bizarre, the fact that anyone would be in the freezing cold water at this hour. Tiffany wanted to move because she was uncomfortable, and it seemed like whoever it was just watching her somehow. It just felt like that. So we took a walk further down the beach until we thought we had privacy. We sat back down on the beach with nothing but the sound of the ocean waves and our voices. But Tiffany was once again the one to point out something. "You hear that?" she asked me. I did kind of hear it. It was like a smaller kind of splashing sound, but it stopped as soon as it started. We looked out to the ocean, and I heard Tiffany gasp. The guy was out there again. I was gonna go out there and tell him to back off, but Tiffany told me no, let's just go. I was hoping she would. I just wanted to look tough in front of her. We got back to the car, and CJ and Gianna weren't back yet. Suddenly my phone started blowing up with texts, all from CJ. Apparently he'd been texting me in some kind of panic the whole time we were on the beach, and I guess I didn't have any reception out by the water. He texted me first saying, "Dude, some weird guy is in the water watching us." And then, "Yo, some weird deformed looking guy is stalking us, get to the car now." 5 minutes later he sent a couple of other texts, basically panicking over being followed by something in the dark. Keywords, something, not someone, something. His second to last text said he was going to come look for us and to answer when I got this. His last text was, "We're on our way back to the car, now, get there." He also tried calling me 3 times apparently. I called him back at once and he picked up right away, out of breath, not even letting me speak. All he asked was if I was near the car and I said yes. He said, "Good, stay right there," and hung up the phone. Less than 30 seconds later, Gianna and CJ came out of the surrounding darkness next to the Jeep. He explained the best he could while trying to catch his breath, that some deformed looking creature walking on 2 legs was following them. I didn't know whether to laugh at what he said or not. I told him about how we saw someone in the water too. He asked me to describe what it looked like. I kept getting confused by his way of describing the person as if it was a creature. I told him it looked like a really tall, lanky person standing in the water. He said he got a chance to take a closer look at it, and it was some kind of deformed humanoid thing. Tiffany and I looked at each other, and now we kind of nervously laughed. What he was saying was just too bizarre, but I think parts of both of us took him seriously. Gianna even vouched for what he was saying. It was a scream that made us all jump into the car. It was some kind of half-human, half-demonic kind of screaming. I can't describe it, you just have to hear it. Needless to say, we were all frantic in the car, asking CJ questions. But nearer the end of the ride, we all grew silent. I guess we were all just lost in our thoughts about what had happened. To give you an idea of how quickly all of this happened, we were on the dunes for about half an hour. After I heard that scream, I did start to believe CJ somewhat, but I still feel like what I saw in the ocean was a person. Just CJ's way of describing who or what was following him as some kind of deformed humanoid thing on the beach, that is what still freaks me out the most. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. It was Black Friday, meaning me and my brothers were going video game shopping. Our first and only stop was Walmart. The place was absolutely mobbed, and being Walmart, it was mobbed with the wrong kinds of people. Gross, weird, and just creepy people everywhere trying to save a few bucks on already cheap products. We rode the escalators upstairs to the video game section. I was looking for the latest Call of Duty game, personally, but my brothers were looking for some other game I don't remember. Then, out of nowhere, some creepy, heavy, oldish man who smelled like vomit walked up to me and said, "You like video games, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I began to slowly slide away just to show that I wasn't interested in conversation. "My son likes video games too. Maybe you should come over and play some with him. He really craves company." The man gave me a creepy smile. "Oh no, I'm not from around town, sorry." That's all I could think of saying. I didn't even give him a chance to keep this conversation going. Hell, I wasn't obligated to stand there and talk to this guy. I simply gave him a smile and called my brother's name out while walking away, just to seem distracted. I did give a quick backwards glance. He was just staring at me as I walked away. I made it to the next aisle over and immediately felt comfort and being next to my brothers. I waited around until they finally found their game and we headed over to the checkout counters. The lines were insane. I knew it would probably take 10 to 15 minutes just to make it to the counters. So I took that opportunity to check out some of the jeans and t-shirt sales. At one point, I found myself in probably the most secluded corner of the store checking out some of the t-shirts when someone grabbed my arm hard. I thought it was my brother messing with me, so I turned around and told him to fuck off. But it wasn't him. It was that man. I started calling for help, screaming that I didn't know this man. Some people came over and stared, but that was about it. The man then simply walked away. I don't know what he was thinking or planning on trying in such a public place. I didn't tell my brothers what had happened out of embarrassment, but they picked up on the fact that I was quiet afterwards. "It's nothing," I kept telling them. We got into my brother's Camaro, and when I sat down, I looked to the entrance of the Walmart, and there he fucking was, sitting at the bench facing me. As we left the lot, we had to pass right in front of the store, and I got one last look at that creepy man. His head moved ever so slightly to constantly face me. Even through the car window at night, I gave him the finger, but it didn't seem to influence him in the slightest. That was the last I ever saw of him. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. What you're about to hear was the worst night of my life. I went out to a downtown club with my boyfriend and his friends on a Saturday night. My boyfriend and I hadn't been getting along for a while, and at some point in the club, we had an argument. I didn't want to be there anymore, so I went outside and called a Uber to pick me up. It was raining that night, so I waited under the awning of the building nearby to the club. A white car pulled up in front of me and stopped. I walked over, and the woman driving rolled down the window. She said, "Uber?" And I said, "Yeah," and then a name. She said, "Yes." So I got in the back seat and I asked, "How are you?" And I'm pretty sure she didn't answer. When I didn't hear a response to my question, I shot a glance up from my phone for a second. That woman had both hands firmly planted on the steering wheel. She was driving in a very stiff, upright position. She also had very curly hair and a somewhat darker skin complexion. She was driving down the street I usually took to get back home, only she was going in the opposite way. I didn't want to speak up and correct her just yet, because maybe she was taking a different route. The further we went away from my house though, the more concerned and frustrated I got. Finally, I spoke up and told her that she was going the wrong way. She said in a horrible thick accent, something about how she was going to take the highway instead. I knew for a fact that the highway wasn't the quicker route though. Then my phone vibrated and I looked down to see the notification from Uber. It said on my screen, "Meet Uber driver now." I opened up the app and it said my Uber had just arrived at the point I was originally standing at, and the car I was supposed to get in was a black Nissan. At this point, I started to say in a louder voice to the driver that she wasn't my Uber. I asked her to pull over and let me out. When she didn't seem to acknowledge me, I started to actually yell and push at her seat. Even though the car was moving, I even tried opening the door, but apparently the child lock was still on. After a little more yelling, she finally looked at me through the mirror and then pulled off to the side. The door clicked, unlocked, and I got out of the car and walked away from it. My actual Uber driver was calling me, and I picked up, apologizing and asking him to come to my current location. He said he'd be there right over. 5 minutes later, the car pulled up, and when I got in his car, I explained everything to him. He stopped the car, looked at me, and told me I had just escaped a sex trafficking trap. There have been reports of multiple fake Ubers going around, trying to trick on suspecting victims and to get into the car to lure them away to unknown locations. It was apparently part of a sex trafficking ring, and the drivers were usually female to appear less intimidating to the female victims. I just want to stress to everyone to make sure the car you're getting into is actually your Uber.
This happened pretty recent, about 3 weeks ago. Myself and 3 friends were hanging out at a shopping center one evening. We were messing around posting clips on TikTok. Then one of my friends started laughing, and I asked her what she was laughing at. She told me that guy behind us kept staring at me. When I turned around, it was some older guy just watching me. He had black sunglasses, a cap, an old Adidas tracksuit with scuffed up shoes, and had a disgusting looking beard. My friends thought it was hilarious, but I found it really weird. Then another one of my friends said she thinks that guy lives on her street, about a few houses down from her. She said that he actually follows her on TikTok. At that point, I quickly got my phone out to check if he was following me, and he was. I had to block him because he seemed a bit creepy. We went to get McDonald's before we went home, and I received a message on TikTok from someone. It was that guy who had been following us. His name was Greg, and he wrote, "Why did you block me?" with 2 emojis. One was a crying face, and the other one was an angry face. He had actually created another account that day in the shopping center. I blocked that account as well, hoping that would be the end of it. I didn't mention it to my friends this time, knowing they would just laugh. That night, I was up late and had Netflix on in the background as I was chatting with my friends on Facebook while scrolling through TikTok. I got up to use the bathroom, and when I returned, I had 3 messages from my friends, all saying the same thing. All were things like, "Who's in your room?" and "What's up with your last post?" I asked them what they were talking about, and they told me to check my TikTok, so I did. It was a clip of my bedroom. It was a clip of someone picking up my phone and recording the inside of my room. At that point, I heard a creaking. Then I heard a man's voice say, "Sorry. Please don't scream." And turned to see my closet door slightly open. I started to scream when the same guy who had been following us burst out of my closet and tried to cover my mouth. Thank God I screamed and it was enough for my parents to hear. They came upstairs and my dad tackled the guy to the floor. The police were called and he was arrested. We were informed that the guy had straight up admitted to stalking and breaking and entering. One of my friends pointed out, if I go back and look at the post on TikTok from when we were in the shopping center, you can see Greg is in almost all of those pictures, somewhere in the background. I haven't heard what's going to happen to Greg yet, but I just hope he won't ever come near us again.
A few years ago, there was a young man named Brian who went to university. He didn't have enough money to live on the campus accommodation, so he had to rent an apartment of his own in the city. After he'd been living there alone for a while, he began to notice some strange things happening. Often when he came back from college, the curtains in his bedroom would be drawn when he distinctly remembered having left them open when he left that morning. At other times, some of his belongings seemed to have been moved, and other possessions were just nowhere to be found. These strange occurrences started to creep Brian out, so the young man decided to talk to his friends, Trisha and Alex, about the situation. They met him at a local diner, and over coffee, he told them all about the strange things that he had noticed. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid," said Brian, "but I just get the sneaking suspicion that someone is breaking into my apartment during the day while I'm at university and what?" interrupted Alex. "Rearranging your curtains and moving your stuff around? Who in their right mind would bother doing that?" "It sounds crazy, but you might have a stalker," said Trisha. "It's a possibility. If it's true, I think the best thing to do is to contact the police." "What can the police do?" asked Alex. "They're not going to spend their time keeping your apartment under surveillance. Besides, there's no damage to any of your things. There's no sign of a break-in. In short, there's no evidence." "So what options then?" pleaded Brian. "I can't just do nothing." "I know how to put your mind at ease," said Trisha. "It's easy. Just get a video camera, set it up in your bedroom, and leave it running when you go to college. If you really do have a stalker, you can show the tape to the police as evidence." "You know, that's a great idea," said Brian. "And if you're really just paranoid and crazy, you can show the tape to your psychiatrist," joked Alex. That night, Brian borrowed Trisha's video camera and brought it home. The very next morning, he hid it discreetly under some folders. Before he went to college, he pressed the record button and left it running. During the day, while he sat taking notes in lectures, the young man forgot all about the video camera. It wasn't until he arrived home and went into his bedroom that he remembered his plan. Taking the video camera out of his hiding place, he pressed the stop button. Then he took out his mobile phone and called his friend. "Hey Trisha," he said, "I just got home. I'm gonna watch the video." "Cool," said Trisha. "Don't hang up. Tell me if you see anything." He pressed play and watched the recording on the video camera's tiny screen. He saw himself leaving for university in the morning and closing the bedroom door. Then, there was nothing. He pressed fast forward and scanned through the video. The room was empty. "Still nothing," he said. "I can wait," replied Trisha. "Anyway, there's nothing worth watching on TV at the moment." "Oh my God," cried Brian as he pressed play on the camera. What? What?" Trisha begged excitedly. "The door's opening," said Brian. It's a woman." "What is she doing?" asked Trisha. "Just standing there." closing the door, walking around. Oh my god, so weird. What does she look like? Long, black, stringy hair, tattered dress. Do you know her? No, don't recognize her at all. She's carrying a knife, a big kitchen knife. She's going for my trash. Ugh, gross. What's wrong with her? She's going over to the closet. She just got into the closet. Okay, fast forward and see if he does anything else. He scanned through the video for a while, but the room was empty. You know what this means, said Brian. I have the evidence now. I can go to the police and they'll take me seriously. I know, said Trisha. They'll have to. Alex is totally going to freak out when he sees this. No doubt, he didn't believe you, but I did. I know, you're a good friend. Oh my god. What? Brian, press play again. The door's opening again, said Brian. Who is it? Asked Trisha. Oh, it's okay. It's just me coming home from college. He watched himself on the screen, shutting off the camera. Let's go to the police now, said Trisha. I go with you. We can show them the tape. Okay, I'll meet you at the diner in 15 minutes, said Brian. Okay, wait a minute, said Trisha. You said she got into the closet. Did she ever leave? Brian, did she ever get out of the closet? A chill ran down Brian's spine. Behind him, he heard the closet door creak open. Brian, get out of there, screamed Trisha. But it was too late. The phone went dead. When she tried to call him again, there was no answer. Later that evening, the police found the body of the 18-year-old college student lying in a pool of blood. He had been stabbed 21 times. The video camera was clutched in his cold, dead hands, and when the police examined the camera, they discovered that the memory card was missing. No trace of the woman was ever found. Right now, she could be hiding in your closet.